Part 1. The invitation arrived on a warm afternoon, carried in by a breeze that slipped through the small window of the intern office. She stared at it for a long moment before opening it, wondering if it had been delivered to the wrong person. It was written on expensive paper that felt too grand for someone who spent her days sorting files and carrying documents between floors. When she finally unfolded it, she had to read the words twice to believe them. She was invited to the company's annual celebration, hosted by the CEO himself. Her heart raced, not with excitement at first, but with confusion. She knew such events were usually filled with senior staff, partners, and people who belonged to a world far more polished than hers. She was only an intern, and one who quietly blended into corners. She had never expected anyone in the upper floors to even notice her existence. But the invitation had her name clearly printed. They had meant to send it for the next few days. She kept thinking about it. She asked herself again and again whether she should attend. She didn't own anything fancy to wear, not even shoes that matched the tone of such a gathering. She didn't have the kind of confidence people walked with when they entered rooms, where others already spoke the same language of status and wealth. But there was a small voice inside her, telling her that maybe this chance was not a mistake. Maybe she should go and see what it felt like to be around people who usually lived behind heavy wooden doors and glass walls. The day of the event came sooner than she expected. She stood in front of her small mirror, adjusting the only decent dress she owned. It was simple, soft in color, and far from glamorous. Still, she tried to make it look neat. She brushed her hair carefully, applied a little powder, and took a deep breath. What she lacked in appearance, she told herself, she could make up for in sincerity. She reminded herself that she had nothing to prove to anyone. She was simply attending because she was invited. When she reached the venue, she felt her steps slow down on their own. The building looked entirely different at night, lit with soft golden lights that made it appear almost unreal. Expensive cars lined the entrance, and people dressed in elegant clothes walked confidently inside. She watched them as she stood there, clutching her small purse, wondering if she had made a mistake by coming. But she forced herself to walk forward. With every step, she kept repeating quietly inside her mind, "You belong because you were invited." It felt like a fragile sort of courage, but it was enough to move her forward. When she entered the hall, the sound of music and conversation wrapped around her instantly. The room was beautifully decorated, filled with shimmering lights, crystal glasses, and people who seemed to glide rather than walk. She felt out of place the moment she stepped in, and she could sense eyes turning toward her. Not all at once, but in small groups. Glances from people who seemed to be measuring her from head to toe. She tried to ignore them and moved toward a quiet corner near a table decorated with flowers. She told herself she would just stay for a short while, observe the event, and leave before anyone noticed she didn't fit in. But that goal became harder as she heard the first soft laugh from behind her. At first, she thought she had imagined it, but then she heard a second laugh, sharper this time. A small group stood near one of the tall tables, clearly well-dressed and well-connected. She recognized some of them. They were from departments she passed through while delivering files. They were the kind of employees who spoke loudly, laughed loudly, and never noticed the interns around them unless they needed something. One of them whispered something, and another laughed even louder, glancing directly in her direction. Her stomach tightened. She didn't hear the exact words, but she didn't need to. She could read their expressions as easily as if the words were printed on their faces. They were laughing at her dress, at her presence, at the fact that someone like her dared to stand in the same hall as them. She lowered her eyes, hoping if she didn't look at them, they might lose interest. But they didn't. She heard one voice say something like, "Looks like someone walked in from the wrong gate," followed by laughter that stung more than she expected. She took a step back, then another, trying to disappear into the crowd. She wondered if anyone else heard them, or if people were too busy enjoying the evening to notice such small cruelties. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, willing herself not to show how uneasy she felt. After a moment, she stopped near a display of framed photographs that showed the company's achievements over the years. She pretended to admire them, even though her mind was too clouded to register anything she saw. She just needed a place to stand still, to breathe, and to gather her strength. But the whispers followed her again. She didn't know whether it was the same group or another set of people who noticed her discomfort and found entertainment in it. She heard someone say, "I didn't know interns were on the guest list." Another answered, "Maybe she's here to help clean up later." More laughter. She felt heat rise in her chest. Not anger, but embarrassment the kind that made her want to shrink until she was invisible. She wondered if leaving quietly would be better. Maybe no one would even notice. Maybe the evening would continue smoothly without her presence creating ripples of judgment. But as she turned slightly to head toward the exit, something caught her eye. A grand piano stood near the center of the hall, placed elegantly on a small stage decorated with flowers and soft white lights. Its polished surface shone like a mirror. She hadn't seen a real piano this close in a long time. The sight of it stirred something deep inside her, a mix of memories, longing, and a faint ache. She had spent years learning to play on an old, slightly damaged piano in a small music academy in her neighborhood. She had practiced late into the evenings, playing until her fingers grew tired. Music was something that once felt like a part of her soul, but as life became busier and responsibilities grew, she had stepped away from it. Still, the sight of the piano reminded her of a part of herself she had almost forgotten. As she stood there looking at it, a small smile tried to form on her lips, but before it could, another voice cut through the moment. "Do you think she knows what that is?" Someone sneered from behind. The smile faded instantly. She didn't turn around, but she felt the sting of the words as though they were thrown at her. She didn't understand why her presence bothered them so much. She wasn't speaking to anyone. She wasn't disturbing anyone. She was simply there, just like them, holding an invitation that said she had the right to be there. She swallowed lightly, trying to push away the feeling of hurt. She reminded herself again that she wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there because she was invited, nothing more. Still, the weight of the room felt heavy on her shoulders. Every whisper felt louder. Every laugh felt directed at her, even when it wasn't. She wished she could blend into the wall or vanish into the crowd. She wished someone would come and speak to her kindly, or even acknowledge her presence with a simple nod. But no one did. She looked around the hall, trying to find a place where she could stand without attracting attention. But every corner seemed filled with people who looked more comfortable, more confident, more deserving of the space than she felt. After a few minutes, she found herself near a balcony door. She considered stepping outside for fresh air, hoping it might calm her nerves. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her purse strap. She told herself to stay strong, to not let the unkindness of strangers break her spirit. But deep down, she wondered how long she could endure this feeling. She didn't know that someone had been watching her from afar, not with mockery or amusement, but with quiet observation. She didn't know that the night, which had started with discomfort and humiliation, would soon shift in a way she never expected. For now, she only felt the weight of the room pressing against her, and she wished for the evening to end soon, unaware that her story in that hall was only just beginning. Part 2. She stood near the balcony door for a while, pretending to admire the night view even though her thoughts were far from calm. The soft breeze that slipped through the small opening in the door helped her breathe a little easier, but the heaviness in her chest didn't fade. She kept reminding herself that she could leave anytime she wanted. No one would stop her. No one would even notice. But for some reason, she couldn't make her feet move toward the exit. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the small part of her that didn't want the people who mocked her to think they had succeeded in pushing her away. She took a sip of water from a glass she picked up earlier, hoping it would steady her nerves. Around her, the noise of laughter, conversations, and clinking glasses filled the hall. People moved effortlessly, as though they were on a stage where they knew every step and she was the only one who didn't know the script. Suddenly, another round of laughter echoed from the same group that had mocked her earlier. She didn't want to turn around, but she sensed they were still watching her. She kept her eyes fixed on the balcony as if it were the only safe spot in the entire hall. But the voices grew louder, and she could hear bits of what they were saying. "Look at her," one of them said. "She's standing there like she's lost." Another voice answered, "Maybe she's waiting for someone to rescue her." They all laughed again. The words stung, even though she tried to pretend they didn't. She wondered how people could find joy in making someone else uncomfortable. She wondered if they would behave the same way if they knew even a small part of her story, what she had gone through, what she had worked for, what she had sacrificed. But she knew the truth. People rarely cared about the stories behind someone's quietness. She placed her empty glass on a nearby table and took a deep breath. She told herself again that staying strong didn't mean she had to fight back or argue. Sometimes strength was simply staying where you were without letting others move you. Still, the room felt colder now. Not because of the temperature, but because of the atmosphere around her. She could feel eyes following her every move. Some curious, some judgmental, some amused. She wished she could shrink herself small enough to slip unnoticed between the crowd. She turned slightly and looked around for a seat, somewhere far enough from the group that continued whispering, but almost all the seats were filled with guests who seemed deeply involved in conversations. She didn't want to interrupt anyone, nor did she want to squeeze herself into a space where she felt she didn't belong. So she walked slowly toward the far side of the hall, where a few paintings hung on the wall. She stood quietly in front of them, pretending to study the artwork. She didn't really see the paintings, though. Her thoughts were too tangled, jumping between embarrassment and the pressure of staying composed. After a moment, when she felt her shoulders relax slightly, she heard footsteps approaching. For a second, she feared it was someone from the same group trying to provoke her again. But when she turned her head ever so slightly, she saw an elderly couple walking past her. They didn't even glance at her. She felt relieved by their harmless presence. She shifted her gaze back to the paintings, letting her mind drift. She wondered what she would be doing if she had stayed home instead. Maybe she would be practicing old tunes on the small keyboard she had bought years ago. Maybe she would be reading or studying. But a part of her knew she would have wondered endlessly about the event she didn't attend. At least now she wouldn't have to wonder. Moments passed slowly, and she kept moving from one spot to another in the hall, trying to find a place where she felt less visible. She crossed her arms lightly, not out of discomfort, but to hold herself together. As she walked, she noticed two employees whispering while looking in her direction. She pretended not to see them, but she could hear them clearly. Who invited her? One asked. No idea. The other said. Maybe she came with someone. Does she even know anyone here? That dress doesn't look like it belongs in this event. Their voices faded as they walked away, but the words lingered in her mind like small scratches on glass. She wondered why people cared so much about someone else's clothes or presence. She wasn't taking anyone's space. She wasn't disturbing the event. She was just existing quietly. Why was that so hard for them to accept? She found a spot near the corner where the lighting was softer. She stood there and looked around, observing the piano again. It seemed to shine even brighter under the lights. She felt a pull toward it, like a soft tug from a distant memory. She wondered if anyone would play it tonight, or if it was just a decoration meant to make the hall look elegant. She thought about the first time she ever touched a piano. She had been very young, standing on a stool because her hands couldn't reach the keys properly. Someone at the small academy had noticed her interest and had let her try. Even then, she had felt that strange warmth in her heart when she touched the keys. The idea that she could create sound with her own hands had felt magical. From then on, she had spent countless evenings practicing. Sometimes the lessons were hard. Sometimes she felt discouraged. But she always returned to the piano, because it was the one place where she felt like she wasn't judged. The keys didn't laugh at her. The melodies didn't whisper behind her back. Music accepted her without hesitation. As she stood there remembering those moments, she wondered if life had slowly pushed her away from the things she loved. She had been so busy trying to keep up with responsibilities that she barely had time for music anymore. Seeing the piano tonight reminded her of something. She had almost forgotten a part of her that felt alive, in ways nothing else could bring out. She didn't notice that the same group from earlier had moved closer, their voices growing louder again. She didn't turn around, but their words reached her clearly. Why is she staring at the piano like that? Someone joked. Maybe she thinks she can play. Another responded. A burst of laughter followed. She shut her eyes for half a second, not because the words hurt. She was used to being underestimated, but because she didn't want to show her emotions to people who didn't care. She kept her gaze steady on the piano, forcing her thoughts back to the memories that brought her comfort. But the noise behind her didn't stop. One voice finally said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "Someone should ask her to play. Let's see what she does then." A few people chuckled. Others looked confused, unsure whether it was a joke or a cruel suggestion. She felt her heartbeat quicken. She didn't want anyone to push her into the spotlight. She didn't want to be part of any joke. She took a step to the side, hoping to walk away before anyone else paid attention to the comment. But she froze when she heard a voice she hadn't heard before, not mocking, not amused, but calm and authoritative. "What's going on here?" The laughter stopped instantly. Even she felt the air shift. She didn't turn around, but she sensed the person who spoke was someone influential, someone others respected. A moment of silence stretched before one of the earlier voices answered. "Oh, we were just joking around," the calm voice replied. "There is a difference between joking and disrespect. You should know that." A few people nearby lowered their eyes. No one said anything. Then the same calm voice spoke again, this time directed toward her. "Are you all right?" Her heart thumped. Slowly, she turned her head to see who had spoken to her. She found herself looking at the CEO of the company, standing just a few steps behind her. His expression wasn't harsh. It wasn't pitying either. It was simply sincere. She wasn't sure how to respond. She felt a mix of relief, confusion, and nervousness tightening in her throat. She managed a small nod, hoping it was enough. The CEO looked at her for a moment longer, as if he was trying to understand what had happened without forcing her to explain. Then, gently but clearly, he said, "Would you like to play something?" The question caught her off guard. She wasn't sure she heard it correctly. She blinked once, unsure if he was asking seriously or simply offering her a way out of the uncomfortable situation. But the room had fallen silent again, and she realized everyone had heard him. Her breath caught, and she felt something shift inside her. Fear, hope, uncertainty all tangled together in one fragile moment. The night she thought would end in humiliation was suddenly turning into something entirely unexpected. She stood still, not yet knowing what her answer would be, but she could feel her heart beating faster, as if it already knew the direction her story was about to take. Part 3. For a moment, she could barely breathe. The room felt too still, too focused, as if every sound had faded into the background and only the CEO's question echoed in the air. She looked at him, unsure whether he truly meant it or whether he was offering her a polite way to step out of the awkward situation. But he stood there patiently, not pressuring her, not rushing her. His expression remained calm, almost encouraging. The guests around them watched quietly. Some looked curious, others surprised, and a few looked uneasy as if they regretted their earlier words. She lowered her eyes briefly, trying to gather her thoughts. She had not touched a real piano in months. She had not practiced seriously in even longer. The idea of sitting in front of so many people, especially those who had mocked her, made her stomach twist. She wasn't sure she could lift her hands without trembling. But another part of her, the part that remembered the comfort of old melodies, whispered softly, "This is your moment. Don't let fear take it away." She took a slow breath, then another. When she finally lifted her gaze, she found the CEO still watching her gently. She didn't know how long it had been since anyone looked at her with such sincerity. "I can try," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the quiet hall. But the CEO heard her. He gave a small nod, respectful and reassuring. He didn't smile too widely or make a grand gesture. He simply stepped aside and motioned toward the piano as if offering her a path. She hesitated for a second, then began walking. Her steps felt heavy at first, but with each one, a strange kind of confidence began to build. She could feel eyes following her, but for once, she didn't feel trapped by them. Instead, she felt something warm rising in her chest, something like purpose. As she approached the piano, she ran her fingers lightly along its polished surface. The instrument felt smooth and cool, almost comforting. It reminded her of all the late nights spent practicing in the quiet room of the small academy. It reminded her of the times she forgot her worries while playing, when the only thing that mattered was the sound beneath her fingertips. She took a seat slowly, aware of the whispering silence behind her. No one made a sound. No one laughed. She could feel the weight of the moment, but this time, it wasn't crushing. It was lifting her, giving her the push she needed. She placed her hands on the keys. They trembled slightly, but she didn't move them away. She let her fingers rest there, feeling the familiarity of the smooth ivory under her skin. A soft breath left her lips. She closed her eyes, and then she played. The first notes were gentle, delicate, like a quiet whisper in a large room. For a second, she feared her hands wouldn't remember what to do. But then something inside her unlocked, and her fingers began to move more naturally, flowing into a melody she had played countless times in her younger years. It was a tune she loved, one that always carried emotion without needing words. Soft, warm, but filled with depth. It started slowly, drawing the room into silence, and then grew richer, fuller. As though her own heartbeat shaped the music, she didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. Her world existed only between the keys, in the movement of her hands, in the rise and fall of the notes. Every sound echoed with memories, late nights, hard days, moments she had once believed were behind her. The hall remained silent, captured by the shift in atmosphere. People who had mocked her earlier stood frozen, their smiles fading, their eyes widening. Some guests who had been deep in conversation turned to listen. The soft, emotional tune filled every corner of the hall, wrapping around the guests like a gentle wave. The CEO stood not far away, watching quietly. His expression softened with each passing moment, as if he had expected something remarkable yet still felt moved by it. As she played, the melody grew more powerful. Her fingers danced across the keys with confidence she didn't know she still had. The music rose, then softened, then rose again, like a story being told without a single word. People who had ignored her earlier now found themselves unable to look away. Those who whispered behind her back now listened as if each note held a piece of truth they had overlooked. For the first time that evening, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel out of place. She felt seen, but in a way that didn't hurt. She felt respected. By the time the final note drifted through the air, the hall was so silent that even the soft tapping of her fingers lifting from the keys felt loud. She kept her eyes closed a moment longer, letting the final sound settle inside her chest. When she finally opened her eyes, she didn't turn around immediately. She took one more breath, steadying herself, preparing for whatever reaction waited behind her. She slowly rose from the seat and turned. The room erupted into applause. It wasn't hesitant applause. It wasn't polite or forced. It was real, warm, loud, and full of surprise. A few people even stood, clapping with genuine emotion. She watched in disbelief as faces that once held judgment now held admiration. The group that had mocked her earlier stood frozen. None of them clapped at first, too shocked to process how the person they had underestimated so easily had just delivered something so breathtaking. But as the applause grew louder around them, they awkwardly joined in. Though their faces flushed with embarrassment, she felt her eyes grow warm, not from sadness this time, but from something gentler: relief, gratitude, and a long-lost sense of self-worth. The CEO stepped forward, the applause softening as he approached her. He didn't offer a dramatic speech or draw attention to himself. He simply said, in a voice only she and a few nearby guests could hear, "Thank you." That was beautiful. She lowered her head slightly. "Thank you for asking me to play." His reply was simple. "You deserve to be heard." For a moment, they stood there quietly, surrounded by the fading echo of claps. Then a few guests approached her one by one. Some offered compliments. Others apologized for not noticing her earlier. A few people looked embarrassed, unsure how to approach her now that their assumptions had been shattered. She nodded politely, accepting their words without bitterness. She didn't need their apologies. The music had already spoken for her in ways words never could. Eventually, she stepped aside, letting the event continue normally again. But nothing felt the same. The room no longer felt cold. The stairs no longer felt heavy. She didn't need to hide in any corner now. As she walked toward a quieter area, a middle-aged woman stopped her gently. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The woman asked warmly. She hesitated before answering. "At a small academy near my home. I used to practice a lot, but life got busy." "Well," the woman said with a kind smile, "don't let life keep you too far from this. You have something rare." Her heart warmed at the words. She hadn't expected anyone to care. She certainly hadn't expected a stranger to speak to her with such sincerity. The rest of the evening passed differently. People who once ignored her now treated her with genuine interest. Someone offered her a drink. Another complimented her performance. A few asked whether she had considered performing publicly. She felt lighter now, as if the heavy weight she carried earlier had slowly lifted off her shoulders. But she wasn't proud because of the attention. She wasn't proud because people admired her. She was proud because she had remembered a piece of herself she had long forgotten, a piece that had once made her feel whole. Later in the evening, the CEO approached her again. They stood a short distance away from the crowd, where the noise softened enough for a calm conversation. "You handled yourself well," he said. She looked away shyly. "I wasn't sure I could." He shook his head softly. "You didn't just play well. You reminded everyone here why respect matters. Talent and character don't need fancy clothes or titles." His words felt like a gentle reassurance, a reminder that what happened earlier didn't define her. As the event neared its end, she stepped outside to breathe in the cool night air. The lights from the hall glowed behind her, but she didn't feel drawn back inside. She felt content, standing under the quiet sky, letting everything that happened settle in her heart. She thought about the moments that led her to this point: the mockery, the discomfort, the unexpected invitation to play, the applause that followed. She realized the night wasn't just about proving others wrong. It was about rediscovering who she was. She looked at her hands, still slightly warm from playing. She smiled softly, for the first time in a long while. She felt proud of herself, and though she didn't know what would come next, she knew one thing for certain. This night had changed something inside her, something she would carry forward into the days ahead, long after the music faded. He stood there in the center of the room, smiling at the guests as if nothing unusual had happened, but inside, his heart was pounding in a quiet rhythm he couldn't fully control. When he had watched her play earlier, something had changed in him. He didn't show it openly, but something inside had shifted, like a window opening in a room that had been closed for far too long. She noticed him watching her, but she quickly looked away, pretending to focus on anything else in the room. She didn't want him to think she was expecting attention from him. After all, people like him rarely gave people like her a second look. She was only there because she needed the job. She wasn't someone important. But he continued to observe her, not in a strange way, but with curiosity, almost as if he was trying to understand something about her that no one else could see. She felt her face warm, so she stepped aside, pretending to arrange a tray of glasses even though the table was already perfectly set. As the music played softly through the speakers, guests drifted around chatting, laughing, and complimenting each other. No one paid attention to her anymore, which normally would have given her some relief, but now she felt something else, an uneasy pull inside her chest, like a question she wasn't ready to ask. Why did he choose her to play? What exactly had he seen? And why did he look at her now as if he wanted to speak to her again? She tried to shake the thoughts off. The last thing she needed was to imagine things that weren't real. She was there to work, nothing more. But just as she turned to leave the corner she had tucked herself into, she heard someone call her. Not loudly, not sharply, but in a gentle voice that still managed to cut through the noise of the room. It was him. He walked toward her, though not in the commanding way she expected from a man who owned half the companies represented at the event. Instead, his steps were slow, almost careful. "You play beautifully," he said, his voice calm and sincere. She lowered her eyes. "Thank you, sir. I just did my best." "Did your best?" he repeated softly, almost amused. That didn't look like someone simply doing their best. That looked like someone who's lived inside the music for a long time. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. Double quotes. "Where did you learn?" he asked. She took a small breath. "At a small community center. When I was younger, they had an old piano. The keys were uneven, and sometimes they stuck, but I used to go there almost every evening." He listened closely, not interrupting. His expression changed slightly, not with pity, but something else, genuine interest. "You taught yourself?" he asked. "Mostly," she said. "There was an older man there who played sometimes. He wasn't a real teacher, but he showed me a few things. I learned the rest by watching videos on an old phone." He smiled, but it wasn't a smile that mocked her humble beginnings. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they admire the strength it took to get somewhere without help. "You know," he said after a moment, "when I asked you to play, I didn't expect anything like what you did. I only wanted to lighten the mood. People were getting restless, but you changed everything." She looked up slowly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Trouble?" He shook his head. "You didn't cause trouble. You brought life into the room. Everyone felt it, even the ones who pretend they didn't." She didn't realize she had been holding her breath until she saw her hands trembling slightly. His words touched something deep inside her, something she had buried for years, because she thought no one would ever care. "You have a gift," he continued, "and gifts like that shouldn't be hidden." Her heart tightened. She wanted to believe him, but she had lived long enough to know the world didn't open doors easily for people like her. "I don't know if it's a gift," she whispered. "It's just something I love." "Sometimes," he said. "Loving something enough is exactly what makes it a gift." Before she could respond, a group of guests approached him, calling his name with the kind of confidence only people who think they own the world have. He gave her an apologetic look. "Duty calls," he said softly. "But I would like to speak with you again before the night ends." She nodded, though she wasn't sure if he meant it or if it was the kind of polite line people in power sometimes said without thinking. When he walked away, she felt her chest flutter in a way she couldn't fully understand. She stepped back behind a table, trying to focus on her work. But every now and then, she saw him glancing her way when he thought she wouldn't notice. The guests around him talked loudly, their words floating through the room about business deals, investments, and expensive vacations. But he didn't seem interested in half of what they were saying. He nodded politely, but his attention drifted now and then, almost as if he was waiting for the right moment to break away. She tried to stay busy collecting empty glasses, refilling trays, straightening decorations. But her thoughts kept circling back to what he had said. You have a gift. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever looked at her with that kind of belief. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what life might have been like if she had been born with more opportunities, more support, more guidance. Maybe she would have been on a real stage by now. Maybe she would have played for crowds, not for guests who didn't know her name. But she pushed the thoughts away. Daydreaming wouldn't change anything just then. One of the women who had mocked her earlier walked past. The woman stopped and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't the same mocking look from before. It was different, hesitant, even uneasy. You really played well, the woman said awkwardly. The compliment surprised her so much she almost didn't know how to respond. Thank you, she said quietly. The woman nodded once and walked away quickly. As if embarrassed, she blinked, unsure if she should laugh or stare in confusion. It was the last thing she expected. Later in the evening, when the guests began to settle into quieter conversations, the CEO approached her again. This time he wasn't smiling politely. He looked focused. Would you come with me for a moment? He asked. She hesitated. Is something wrong? No, he said gently. I just want to show you something, though nervous. She nodded and followed him out of the main hall. They walked down a quieter hallway where the music and chatter faded behind them. He stopped in front of a door and opened it. Inside was a room with soft lighting, shelves filled with books, and in the center a polished black piano. Her breath caught. This is my private study, he said. I come here when I need to think. She stepped closer to the piano, almost afraid to touch it. Why did you bring me here? She asked softly. He looked at her with a calm seriousness. Because I want to hear you play again, he said. Not for the guests, not for anyone else, just for yourself. She stared at the piano in the quiet room, feeling as if the world had suddenly become smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller because it was just the two of them now, far from the noise and judgment of the party. Larger because this moment felt like something that could change her life in ways she couldn't yet understand. He didn't rush her. He simply stood near the door, giving her space, giving her silence, giving her the rare gift of not being watched like someone who didn't belong. Instead, he watched her like someone whose presence mattered. Her hand gently brushed over the piano's smooth surface. She had never touched an instrument this perfect before. The keys looked like they had never been pressed too hard or mistreated. They looked like they were waiting for someone who respected them. I don't want you to feel pressured, he said softly. I just think you deserve a moment where the music is only yours. She felt something warm move through her chest. She had spent years playing quietly, only when she could sneak moments alone, afraid someone would hear her and tell her she didn't belong near the instrument. Now someone was offering her a chance not just to play, but to be seen. She sat down slowly, adjusting the bench. The room felt completely still. She pressed one key. The sound was so clear and rich that it made her breath catch. She closed her eyes for a second. Then she began to play, not loudly, not showing off, just letting her fingers move with the kind of honesty she rarely showed anyone. Every note felt like a part of her childhood, her struggles, her dreams she had kept hidden because hope was something she never had enough of. He watched her quietly, leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed loosely. He wasn't watching like a CEO evaluating something. He was watching like someone who was experiencing something rare. As she played, memories came back to her: the broken piano at the community center, the times she played on makeshift keyboards drawn on paper, the nights she hummed melodies to herself because she had no instrument at all. She poured all of it into the music. When she finally stopped, the room felt heavier in the best way, like something meaningful had filled it. She looked up at him, breathing slowly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to play that long. Don't apologize, he said, stepping closer. That was. He took a small breath. That was the kind of music people remember. Her cheeks warmed. She looked down at the keys, tracing the edge of one with her fingertip. You should be proud of yourself, he said. Truly proud. She shook her head softly. It's not enough. People who become someone, they get real training, real lessons. They have support. And what you did without those things is even more impressive, he replied. Not less. She met his eyes, and for the first time, she saw something in his expression that she had never expected. Belief. Not the polite kind, the real kind. He sat on the chair opposite her, though keeping a respectful distance. Can I ask you something? He said. She nodded hesitantly. If life had given you the chance, would you have chosen music as your path? Her answer came before she could think. Yes, it left her lips too quickly, too honestly. But she didn't regret it. She had spent her whole life surviving, not choosing. It felt strange to say what she wanted. He noticed the certainty in her voice, and she saw his expression soften. Then maybe, he said gently, it's not too late. Her heart stumbled. She didn't know what he meant or how seriously he meant it, but the thought alone made her chest tighten. Before she could respond, someone knocked on the door. He stood up and opened it slightly. One of his assistants whispered something to him about guests waiting for him. He closed the door again and looked at her with an apologetic smile. I have to go back, he said quietly. But I'm not done talking to you. Please don't leave before I come back. She nodded, unsure what else to say after he left. She sat alone in the room. The silence felt different now, safe, warm, almost comforting. She touched the keys again softly, playing a quiet, slow pattern, like the beginnings of a new thought. For the first time, the possibility of a different life didn't feel impossible. It felt faintly. Maybe. She didn't know how long she sat there before she heard footsteps approaching again. She straightened quickly as he entered with a gentler expression this time, one that told her he had been thinking. I want to ask you something important, he said. Her breath caught. Okay. He sat down across from her, resting his hands together. Have you ever considered studying music properly? With real guidance, real support, real opportunity? She swallowed hard. I never had the chance. You do now, he said quietly. She blinked, unsure what he meant. I'd like to sponsor your training, he continued. Not as charity, not as a favor, but because I believe your talent deserves to grow. It would be my honor to help you get the opportunities you should have had from the start. Her eyes widened. I can't accept something so big. Why not? He asked calmly. Her voice was barely a whisper. Because no one has ever offered me anything like that. It doesn't feel real. It's real, he said. And I'm offering because you earned it. Not because of pity. Not because I feel sorry for you. But because when you played tonight, you reminded me what real passion sounds like. And that's something the world needs more of. Emotion welled up inside her, thick and overwhelming. She tried hard not to cry, not here, not in front of someone who had already seen her vulnerable. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything tonight, he replied. Just think about it. Whatever you choose, I'll respect it. You're in control of your own path, she nodded, even though her hands trembled slightly. When they left the study and walked back toward the main hall, the music from the speakers drifted toward them. The guests were gathered again, laughing and chatting, but everything felt different to her now. The world didn't seem as heavy as it had earlier. As she stepped back into the crowd, a few guests glanced her way, not with mockery this time, but with curiosity, even respect. The room that once felt like it was suffocating her now felt a little more open. She watched him walk toward a group waiting for him, but before he reached them, he turned back and gave her a small, reassuring nod. And for the first time in her life, she felt seen. Later, when the event ended and she was gathering the last of the trays, he walked over again. Thank you for tonight, he said. Thank you for everything, she replied quietly. I meant what I said, he reminded her. Think about the offer. It's your future, and it's waiting for you whenever you're ready. She nodded, feeling a mix of fear and hope twisting inside her. As she left the party and stepped into the cool night air, she wrapped her arms around herself. The city lights glowed in the distance, reflecting off windows and quiet streets. She looked up at the sky. For years, she had only looked down, trying to stay unnoticed, trying to protect herself, trying to survive. But now, she looked up. Maybe, just maybe, life wasn't done giving her chances. Maybe she wasn't done dreaming. And as she walked toward the bus stop, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, warm, alive hope. Maybe this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was only the beginning.